And okay, Frank. So we were just talking then about CBT and the latest kind of emphasis of the therapy. And let's look now at CBT supervision and kind of almost what characterises CBT supervision, kind of differentiates it from, say, as I say, your regular person-centred or other kinds of supervision. And I wondered what your thoughts were. You've been practicing in this area for such a long time now. We won't mention age, but what were your thoughts on, you know, CBT supervision and how that's characterised?
Okay, well, I think I'll start off by saying, and it may not be what you will expect me to say. I'm going to say something to you and then ask you at the end whether you think I might be right on this point.
Okay.
But I think it's more like other supervision than unlike, and I think it's not as different as many people imagine it is. Okay. Basically.
Yep.
And I suppose that I've currently got two supervisees in quite different contexts, and over the years I've probably had about 30 or 40 different supervisees, and I've been collected some data of this. And one of the things that I began by thinking was that people often think that CBT is all about technique. And I think they're right in the sense that I think some CBT therapists very much push that end of it. But in my view, that ignores the process elements of doing any therapy. And one of the things I've tried to argue for in all my writing is that we should pay more attention to the process elements. And what I mean by that is that, so a supervisee, might be asking, should I or should I not use a behavioral experiment with this client? And that's a sort of probably a technical issue.
Yes.
To some degree. But often the question that's more often asked is, why isn't this client responding? Why does this client seem to be resisting my attempts to get them to do a behavioral experiment, which is much more of a process issue?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
So those would be, in preparation for meeting you this morning, I did a double check over supervision I've done over the last year or two, identifying issues that came up, and they roughly divide into four. I was suspecting to find those two categories, but I hadn't thought that there were two other ones too. So obviously the first one is a technical issues. Yeah. Second one is process issues, but the other one is I shouldn't have been surprised by this, but and I'm not surprised now I've got it. But personal issues, the therapist's personal issues do come up, right? In some, and obviously there are boundary issues there, but nonetheless they have to be dealt with one way or the other. And then again, this is more of a surprise, the number of times organizational issues come up.
Right.
For example, several of the people I've supervised are working with organizations where they're limited to having 4, 6, 8, 10, whatever it is, number of sessions. And that very often raises issues, how can I do this within that time allocation? And, another question has come, how can I get my employees to be a bit more flexible about helping me to use that kind of structure in the way that's most beneficial for clients.
I mean, that also chimes for me with something about the organizational and the political, because in a sense the two feel to me to be quite related, that it's where the funds go and the politics about how many sessions people should be allowed, that sort of filters down to the organization. Oh, well, we've only got the funding for 6 sessions, that's all you're getting, sort of thing, isn't it? So the organizational, is a kind of only a manifestation really of the greater societal sort of issues and limitations which we're wrestling with.
Might I mention to you something there, which impressed me at the time I did it? But you remember that when I was at Alterine, at what was then the University of Wales, I did a number of interviews with people like Michael Jacobs, Dave Mearns, and so forth. And Dave Mearns was telling me about his setting up a counselling service that was related to the course he was running up in Scotland. And he managed to get the employers, who I think were the city council actually, to agree to an average of 6 sessions.
Right.
And this was absolutely brilliant because, you know, if a client only turned up once, you then had 5 sessions to allocate, you know, where needed, you know. So I think, you know, creative organizational solutions like that are brilliant if you can do them. And, you know, I've often encouraged people to try and negotiate things with bosses, because often, you know, they don't always have a very clear view and the managers might not have any real hands-on experience of counseling. And, you know, sometimes they will just do what you tell them if you ask them in the right way.
Yes, I think in certain organizations that would be a good, sort of a fairly clever way to cope with it. What I've sort of observed in the NHS and in the primary care, and this may only be specific to an Iron Bevan, but is that it's interesting, the term lockdown. But, you know, the more and more clever people get about that, the more and more they lock down the options. So they're very controlling over the primary care diaries. They're extremely controlling. The minute somebody DNAs, somebody else is put in there, and the counsellors get, you know, less and less autonomy over that, and very full diaries and very little time to think, you know. So again, the sort of government / organization becomes ever more controlling over the.
Absolutely, yes, I did write a little bit about that in one of my books on, you know, the what's called the McDonaldization of therapy, you know, it's very severely or very tightly, you know, over managed, really.
Yes.
But I think probably where we'd agree, and hopefully at least some of the people who are watching this will agree, that, you know, empowering the workers, you know, the counsellors and therapists is ultimately what we all would like to do.
Yes, and that tends to, I think, work to optimal advantage. The other difference, just to as we're nodding to that, is I observe a great difference between the counsellor / psychotherapist working conditions versus the psychologists, who have a lot more autonomy. Of course, both of those groups will be using cognitive therapy and cognitive supervision. So because our background is counselling, we're kind of focused there, but that there are other professionals who get more autonomy over that, and doctors too, actually. Anyway, okay, so I want us to sort of move on now to describe a little bit more about your 4 basic types, if you're willing. Is that okay, Frank?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I've just